Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's Black History Month, a time to celebrate important people and events in Black history. Since my channel primarily focuses on gaming and animation content, I decided that the best way to do that was to dissect and analyze an animated series for the month of February. So, I decided to rewatch Static Shock, a superhero series from the early 2000s notable for not only featuring a black superhero, but for being the first time an African-American superhero was the titular main character of their own animated series, as well as just being a personal favorite of mine. So today, I want to not only look back on Static Shock as a series, but its contribution as a major piece of black history. So without further ado, let's jump into it. As with many superhero stories before him, Static's story starts in the world of comics, specifically the Bronze Age of comics, which lasted through the 1970s and into 1985. Historically, it was a transitional period between the Silver Age of comics, which came before it, and the Modern Age of comics, the era we're currently in. The Bronze Age was largely defined by a darker shift in tone for comics released during this era, as well as an increased focus on social relevance. One of the ways comics decided to approach the latter was with the introduction of more minority superheroes. Minority superheroes had been a thing before, but prior to the Bronze Age, they had been far and few between, with Black Panther and Falcon being some of the only black superheroes to exist before this point. Having observed this, a coalition of African-American artists and writers founded Milestone Media in 1993 with the intent of addressing this general lack of minority heroes in American comics, with Static being among the first heroes created by Milestone as a modern reimagining of the relatable everyman hero archetype that Spider-Man helped to popularize. DC Comics then editor-in-chief Jeanette Kahn saw potential in a lot of Milestone's heroes, and not only signed a contract with them for DC to publish their comics the same year, but started working with them to give several of their heroes their own shows at Warner Bros. Animation. Multiple pilots were made, but a show about Static was ultimately the one that got greenlit. The show generally maintains the spirit and tone of the comic, but due to it being produced for a preteen audience, some creative changes were made to reflect that, such as Richie Foley having a larger role in the series and not being explicitly gay like he is in the comics, as well as Static being portrayed as younger and the decreased use of guns. Additionally, composer Richard Wolff heavily based the show's soundtrack on hip-hop, R&B, and rap music, which gave the soundtrack a very unique vibe. He also created the OP for the first two seasons, while the OP for the latter two seasons was written by Master P and his son Little Romeo and performed by the latter. In fact, Little Romeo shows up as a guest character in one of the episodes. The show aired from September 23, 2000 to May 22, 2004 on the Kids WB. As for the show itself, the story follows Virgil Hawkins, an African-American teenager living in the city of Dakota, whose altercations with the local bully escalates into a full-on gang war that Virgil gets dragged into the middle of. And the police's attempts to stop the conflict results in the accidental explosion of several barrels of mutagenic chemicals stored at the site, resulting in everyone in and around the immediate area becoming metahumans, with the event being referred to by the local news as the Big Bang and the metahumans as Bang Babies. In Virgil's case, he gains electromagnetic powers that allow him to create, generate, store, and control his own electric discharge, which he uses to become the superhero Static and protect Dakota from other metahumans, with his best friend Richie becoming his man in the chair and eventual sidekick after he gains superhuman intellect from secondhand exposure to the gas. Overall, this show is a lot of fun. Not only is it a really fun superhero show in its own right, but it continues to be extremely popular, actively competing with the Pokémon anime at the height of Pokémania while it was airing, and actively competing with Family Guy when reruns started airing on Cartoon Network. In fact, the show is so popular that it led to renewed interest in the Static comics, with Static's first 4 issues being repackaged as Static Shock Trial by Fire, and a new miniseries, Static Shock Rebirth of the Ghoul, being produced shortly after. It also helped Static's co-creator Dwayne McDuffie break into the animation industry, and he would go on to write for 7 more shows until his death in 2011. The only reason Static Shock got cancelled at all was because it didn't produce enough merch, which sadly killed a lot of shows at the time. There's actually a couple of reasons why the show is popular. First, and most importantly, was its celebration of diversity. The show not only provides a positive depiction of an African-American superhero, but an African country as well, as Virgil and his family visit Ghana during their episode Static in Africa and explore both the history and culture of the region. The episode also features a black superhero, Anansi, whom Virgil admits makes him feel validated as a black superhero himself. We also talk about how Richie is Static's gay best friend, and his other friend and love interest Frida is Jewish. There's also the Bang Babies, which I'll go into more depth later, but I want to give Kangor a mention in this section for being portrayed as Jamaican, as well as Talon for being portrayed as Hispanic. There's also the general background characters, who are all portrayed as different races. It's a show that openly promotes diversity for people of all color and ages, while also providing a positive role model that helps promote that diversity, especially at a time where it wasn't a mainstream discussion yet. The second reason why the show was so popular was because it wasn't afraid to depict serious topics and present them in a digestible manner. One of the most prominent themes it explores is gang violence, with the significant departure from the original source material being that Virgil's mother, Jean Hawkins, was killed in a gang riot roughly 5 years prior to the start of the show, and how Virgil's family struggles to make peace with her passing. It also explores themes of bullying, as one of Static's most recurring rivals and adversaries is the villain Hotstreak, who would repeatedly pick on Virgil prior to getting his powers, and would serve as a major point of character growth for Virgil early on in his superhero career. I also mentioned the decreased use of guns earlier, but the show does prominently explore themes of gun violence in the episode Jimmy, where the namesake character, after being bullied relentlessly and struggling with his own mental health issues, gains access to his father's gun and brings it to the Freedmen's Community Center with the intent of shooting and possibly even killing his bullies, only to accidentally shoot Richie instead when someone tries to wrestle the gun out of his hand. Speaking of which, Richie is actually the subject of 2 different episodes. Sons of the Father, which revolves around Richie reluctantly inviting Virgil over to dinner, only for it to be revealed that Richie's dad is a hateful bigot whom Virgil overhears saying some incredibly racist things when he thinks nobody can hear him. And the episode Power Play, which is about Richie meeting a bang baby named Ragtag and temporarily gaining superpowers for the old man in exchange for allegiance, with the powers themselves being an allegory for drug use, and the episode having an overall anti-drug message. There are more examples, but I'll leave you to discover that for yourself in case you haven't seen the show. However, arguably the biggest reason the series was successful was because it was a part of the DC Animated Universe, or DCAU, although not initially. Due to all of the Milestone Comics storylines being set in their own universe at the time, the first season of Static Shock was largely self-contained and didn't really acknowledge the existence of DC or any of its other characters. However, during the production of Season 2, executives at the Kids WB requested a Batman crossover, and since most of Static Shock's crew had worked on Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series, and since they weren't super far along with adapting Static and his world yet, they decided to make Dakota a part of that same universe. This resulted in characters from other DCAU shows showing up as guest characters throughout Seasons 2 and 4, as well as an adult Static showing up as a guest character in the Justice League Unlimited 2-parter, The Once and Future Thing. I probably don't need to tell you how big it was to not only have Static be the first black superhero to get his own show, but to also be put on equal billing as 2 of DC's earliest and most popular characters, and it was honestly really cool to see Static being able to stand alongside the greats like that. But of course, the show wouldn't work if Virgil himself wasn't an interesting character to root for, so let's talk about him. As I briefly mentioned earlier, Virgil's superhero antics as Static were heavily inspired by Spider-Man and his whole gimmick of cracking jokes while fighting crime. The main difference between them is how their powers actually work, as in addition to being able to shoot electricity as you would expect, Virgil also uses electromagnetism to manipulate and control electrically conductive objects. In fact, it's actually how he flies, as his static saucer is made out of mylar. Since Virgil is a science nerd, he's also really good at finding unique and interesting ways to apply his powers, such as generating an EMP to fry various electronics in a nearby area, or manipulating atmospheric pressure to shatter glass. However, perhaps Virgil's biggest strength is his empathy. Virgil actually counts on his dialogue a lot more than he does his fist to finish a fight, and is willing to talk things out with his villains so long as he thinks they're willing to listen. It's a small thing that helps showcase Virgil's good nature and his desire to help everyone, while also helping to ground his villains and round them out as characters. The last point I feel is important since none of the Bang Babies are really villains. In fact, as far as I can tell, the show seems to take a page out of X-Men and treats its interpretation of metahumans as a stand-in for minorities. While there are some instances of Bang Babies who were jerks before gaining their powers, or otherwise had a chip on their shoulder and used their powers to settle a score, there's just as many who are treated as monsters basically for existing. And some of them feel like they need to hide who or what they are in order to live a normal life. That's if they can return to a normal life at all, as some of these guys have gained powers that permanently alter their appearances or otherwise have a debilitating downside, and now are forced to live on the streets instead of with family. In that light, it's not hard to see why so many of them turned to a life of crime or became mercenaries. They didn't really have much of a choice. And while I pointed out earlier that some of them weren't good people to begin with, most notably Yvonne, who uses his powers to become a metahuman kingpin, all of the Bang Babies, whether they're good people or not, are victims of circumstance. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time and suddenly gaining powers that they either don't know how to control or use responsibly. That means that the only true asshole in the story is Edwin Alva, the show's overarching antagonist. Alva wasn't a Static villain originally, being both the main villain and a supporting character of Milestone's Hardware comics, but I do like how they reinterpret him for Static Shock, being the guy whose company invented the mutagenic gas and responsible for all the Bang Babies living in Dakota. and very quickly covering up his company's involvement to maintain his public image. Static, of course, figures out about Alva's involvement almost immediately and attempts to bring him to justice, but the evidence is destroyed in a fight with Hotstreak shortly after. That said, while Alva never receives any legal comeuppance for his actions, karma does indeed catch up with him. During the episode Junior, we learn that Alva has a son, Edwin Alva Jr., and how Alva Sr. thinks very little of his son and constantly berates him for being a disappointment, at one point claiming a statue would do a better job of continuing his legacy. It's also made clear in this episode that Alva only cares about his company and reputation, which only further puts a strain on their relationship. This all comes to a head when Edwin Jr. claims he's found out how the mutagenic gas works, only for his father to once again berate and dismiss him. At which point Edwin Jr. decides to not only prove his theories correct, but to kill two birds with one stone by destroying everything his father built to teach him a lesson, becoming the supervillain Omnifarious and tailoring the mutagenic gas to give himself any power he wants. After Omnifarious learns Static's secret identity, Static is left with no choice but to go to Alva and tell him what his son has been up to in the hopes that they can work it out. Instead, things only escalate, as Edwin Jr. insists he only ever wanted his father to be proud of him, and Alva winds up eating his own words in the worst way possible after his son overdoses on mutagenic gas and turns to stone, leading to a series-long arc of Alva attempting to return his son to normal no matter the cost. Eventually, though, the issues caused by Alva and his mutagenic gas are ultimately undone. Late in the Season 4, we're introduced to Donald Todd, the lead scientist at Genobotech, who was on a breakthrough to discover a way to return Dakota's Bang Babies back to normal. He eventually succeeds in the series finale, but in keeping with what I said earlier about Bang Babies being a stand-in for minorities, the state government decided on their own that since the average Bang Baby is a threat to public safety, it'd be better for everyone to covertly gas Dakota to cure those affected without anyone's knowledge or consent, and regardless of whether or not they wanted to be cured. The episode presents this as incredibly nuanced, as well it means there won't be a metahuman criminal running around Dakota anymore, and the ones with mutated appearances can finally return to a normal life. It also means that any heroes who use their powers for good or otherwise lived a normal life in spite of their powers got caught in the crossfire. It also leads to a final confrontation with Ebon and Hotstreak, who argue over whether or not it's right to restore everyone's powers, and accidentally merge into a flaming tar monster while fighting over the last can of mutagenic gas. Virgil and Richie are able to regain their powers from the gas as well and defeat the merged villains, and the show ends with them deciding to create their own supply of gas so that they can keep being heroes. While this does mark the end of our time with Static Shock, Static's story did continue after this. Following his comic revival, Static and the other Milestone characters were fully integrated into the main DC universe in 2008, with Static becoming a member of the Teen Titans and receiving a short-lived solo series as part of the New 52 reboot. Static Shock was also a major influence on Milestone Returns, a 2020 relaunch of self-contained comics that reimagined a lot of Milestone characters. Specifically, the relaunch redesigned several Bang Babies to be more in line with how they were portrayed on Static Shock, several of the show's new characters were introduced as part of this run, and the Big Bang was made a prominent part of each of the characters' origin. And while Static hasn't been the main protagonist of his own show since Static Shock ended, he was given a recurring role on the critically acclaimed Young Justice starting in Season 2. It honestly makes me very happy that Static's still around in some capacity, and I'll definitely be checking out both Milestone Returns and Young Justice in the near future for more Static content. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching my video on Static Shock. This was a lot of fun to make, and I definitely enjoyed gushing about one of my favorite superheroes for you all. If you've seen the show, what did you think of it? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe, as I do my best to make these once a month and would appreciate the support. If you'd like to support me in a more hands-on way, be sure to check out my Patreon for some exclusive videos. We also have a Discord and a connected Minecraft server, so feel free to join that as well. And finally, check out my main channel, where we stream games together. I'm currently playing through Donkey Kong Bananza, so if that interests you, be sure to subscribe and follow my Twitch. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!